For joining us today. As Emma said, my name is Tim Anderson. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at E2E. The customary slide around who E2E are, just a little bit of background. E2E Assure was founded 10 years ago by Rob Domain. And over this last 10 years, we've been protecting this country's most critical assets. When I joined E2E, we wanted to take that high-end solution in threat detection and response and leverage out some of our capability and that unique capability into the private sector. When I joined in January, we set about looking at our strategy for taking this capability out to the private sector. We started to really ask what clients wanted in a managed threat detection response service, and importantly, what they didn't want. And we had some ideas internally based on our own experience. I had some ideas from previous roles, but we didn't want to make any assumptions or presumptions. So we wanted to really start to test the potential clients and our current clients. Those ideas that we did have were centered around things like active response and shortening SLAs. We also believed that our clients wanted the value demonstrated better. They wanted to utilize their existing technology and those investments that they'd made. And importantly, they were fed up of long-term contracts, these 3 or even sometimes 5-year contracts that held them to ransom rather than held them to a good, robust threat detection or managed security service. But because that was our assumptions, we wanted to set about proving or disproving those hypotheses. So we set about conducting some research. Thank you. And that research, we went out and we hired an independent firm to interview over 500 CISOs and security decision makers. And some of the results that came back were pretty startling. We got confirmation on some statistics, like 77% of the people that we interviewed had experienced a cyber breach. So I think we're all familiar with cyber breaches on the rise, and virtually everybody that we interviewed had experienced some sort of breach. So that in itself wasn't necessarily alarming. It was more proving kind of what we potentially knew. But some of the things that I found were around the dissatisfaction. Over half, 59% of the people that we interviewed suggested that their current outsourced cyber provider was underperforming. And 16% of those people that we interviewed, whether or not it was an in-house team that they had or an outsourced team, 16% found that nobody was exceeding expectations. And that's, of course, what we always strive for, is to exceed expectations. So only 16% found that they were exceeding expectations. And only 22% described their organization as resilient as a consequence. So there were some of the high-level alarming facts, but there was a lot more detail within the report, and there were a lot more questions that we asked, specifically around those whys and whats and hows. And to introduce some of those and to go through some of those, I'm going to ask Dom Carroll to take over now. And Dom is Director of Portfolio and huge amount of experience in product development, product management. He was tasked with looking at this in more detail and articulating that back into our proposition. Dom, can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Tim. Okay, let's dig into what the respondents told us about the good and the not so good of SOC services and the market for threat detection and response. So there are kind of 4 key themes which came out of the report, which I'll go into in some detail. But at the headline level, there's kind of the following. So providers needing to prove their value. And we're not just talking here about the ability to justify the cost of the service. CISOs, our clients, need to be armed with the data that shows the hidden value of what happens in the SOC to prevent attacks. Providers need to ensure they're providing the appropriate metrics and KPIs for customers of all sizes and scale. And then security teams, they will relinquish more control, but to trusted providers. So those providers need to demonstrate not just that they are willing, but also that they take the initiative to understand the customer's business, and we use those insights to make the correct judgments when needed. Contracts being more commercially flexible and service and tooling flexibility becoming more of a priority. So there's always commercial incentives to signing up for longer term contracts. But what if those contracts don't allow for your business to grow, change, and adapt to new threat environments? So more tooling means more complexity and, of course, more cost. And then the last point being a quality cyber defense will become more accessible. So there are mandates, incoming from government and large enterprise for all businesses in the supply chain, particularly the critical national infrastructure supply chain, to meet a minimum standard of protection. So SOC suppliers need to step up and help make enterprise-grade services more accessible to mid-market businesses. Okay, let's kind of jump into each one of those in turn. So let's start with providers needing to prove their value. So one of the key statistics from the report tells us that 59% of the surveyed organizations don't feel their current provider is performing to the level of they had hoped for. And it may well be some of these providers are doing an excellent job of executing their SOC processes against high priority alerts, but there are several other areas which require being proactive in order to push the information the client needs to feel fully informed and not be worn down by a feeling of uncertainty, which may be a contributing factor to the increasing numbers of CISOs that are experiencing feelings of burnout. So a trend that is picked up on in the report is that some organizations are looking into or in the process of insourcing parts or all of their security operations back in-house in terms of what we call a hybrid model. So that it begs the questions of providers, what do they need to be doing to demonstrate they're still worth partnering with to protect the business? So some key areas and activities which the respondents told us will drive proactive insights to alleviate feelings of anxiety include threat hunting, and this can be a bit of a catch-all term, but here we're talking about what can be done in the SOC. So that means going back over the client's data on a regular basis to look for evidence of indicators of compromise in lower level of alerts. So making sure that novel, low and slow attacks are also picked up on. So guidance and roadmaps. So as we all know, cybersecurity is an infinite game. Technology evolves, your organization evolves to make use of that technology, and attackers evolve to abuse that technology. So the service you have onboarded at a given point in time will be subject to what I call detection surface drift, meaning that if you're not updating analytics, log sources, indicators of compromise based on actionable threat intelligence, then within 6 to 9 months you'll have much reduced coverage from where you started out. So how do you check that you're evolving in the right direction? And this is where attack simulation comes in. So without a regular frequency of attack simulations to test your detections and to ensure that what you think you currently have in terms of threat detection coverage is what you actually have, without that, the level of confidence to know that you're prepared will be lacking. So to sum up this slide, for SOC service providers to remain of value to their clients, they need to be more accountable in pushing the necessary insights to keep customers fully informed and ready to respond. Okay, let's look at the next theme in terms of security teams that relinquish more control to trusted providers. So despite that reported trend towards moving some aspects of SOC in-house, there's also a recognition that most businesses don't necessarily desire to run the entire security operation. So those providers that can demonstrate the capability to work collaboratively with in-house security teams will be given a chance to do so, provided they can demonstrate the tangible benefits in terms of quicker decision-making, faster response times, and alleviating overwork and underinvestment for internal teams. A hybrid model can work really well in some scenarios, particularly where you combine a deep and implicit understanding of the business, with cyber expertise that runs 24/7, not just in your organization, but across the entire cyber sphere. And brings with it highly practiced professionals with deep insights into the world of threat intelligence, detection and disruption. But another change, which I believe is one of the drivers towards this hybrid approach, is the advancement of XDR platforms and the surrounding technology, because these remove a lot of the data engineering and complex integration requirements, which used to be a major part of the operation in legacy SOC environments. And a lot of businesses are regaining the confidence to operate part of this SOC in-house. And for less experienced analysts, this new set of tooling can get them off to a flying start without having to learn a myriad of different technologies and query languages. And pairing those teams with battle-hardened professionals who have vast depth and breadth of experience to deal with critical level incidents can provide the best of both worlds. let's take a look at contracts. So one of the outcomes that happens when you're ensuring that your detection surface evolves with the changing attack surface is that you will end up having requirements that are outside the scope of the original contract with your supplier. Now, as we said, there's always financial incentives to sign up to longer term contracts, and they should provide a degree of cost predictability, but the scope of those contracts needs to be flexible and scalable. The predictability needs to be in the sense of working with the client to help understand any commercial implications of improvement actions or of not taking action as well. And this is what we understand the report is telling us about the requirements for transparency. It's in the form of being able to show how the costs will change as the service evolves, and being client-centric to ensure that that spend delivers a clear return on security investment continually. And this always this also ties in with that earlier guidance about and roadmap from the earlier slide. The roadmap's not just required to demonstrate continued threat coverage, but what's also being asked for is to show how it consistently delivers a return on the investment. A lot of that investment focuses on tools, so let's dive into that area. I think what we're seeing with these numbers is that security leaders are being told by their providers that if you want a certain level of coverage in a particular area, then they have to use the tool with which the provider is familiar with. And this, of course, can be really frustrating when you've already invested in a similar tool, which you feel can perform the same task and for which your team is already familiar with. So a common industry trend, with what we're hearing from many different sources, is a need to scale down technological investments and consolidate tooling. And what we're picking up from the data is that businesses expect their providers to assist with identifying the optimal tool deployment, to provide the greatest return on past investments, and deal with future requirements. Okay, in terms of the last point, now on scope, quality cyber defense will become more accessible. This is an interesting one. There's a clear message in the report that a lot of mid-sized and smaller businesses feel like they're getting hand-me-downs in terms of cybersecurity services, and they're less likely to be able to negotiate flexible contracts or be allocated specialist expertise. Smaller organizations are letting us know that they're not confident that they will be afforded the same level of attention as larger organizations when there's a new industry-wide threat. And it kind of will be bottom of the pecking order, so to speak. With supply chain attacks on the rise, it could be argued that mid-market companies are in equal need of enterprise level protection, and so there's going to be a lot more pressure on service providers to be much more innovative around how they're going to think about providing nation-state level defences that are accessible for mid-market budgets and provide that same level of contract flexibility. So that's kind of concludes a bit of a deep dive into the findings of the report. Andrew, I think you have some questions, so I'm going to hand over to you for the Q&A.
Perfect, thank you very much. And my pen has just decided the perfect time to fall apart in my hands was right then, so perfect for that. So let me get my questions here. Actually, you know what I'm going to start with? I'm going to start with the questions that are being asked in the chat, because let's just get those done straight away. So Derek asked a question about testing. You mentioned about doing attack simulations. So for Dom, attack simulations, should they be part of your business continuity process and simulation exercises? Or are these attack simulations you're talking about a more frequent, a more technical, or a different thing entirely? How do they fit alongside that scenario rehearsal with the exec board and the technical testing?
Well, that's an amazing question. So I think the two both go hand in hand.
Okay.
When we're talking about the service provider testing the coverage and the service is providing the outcomes, as expected, that's much more the technical, the frequency part. But we also we work with incident response partners to do the kind of emergency incident response scenario testing in desktop, and that's kind of more the business disaster recovery process. But I think a part of any modern disaster recovery plan includes what happens if a cyber attack takes our entire business offline. How do we recover from that? So the two need to work seamlessly hand in hand together. But what we're talking about here is how we evolve that continuous testing, kind of purple teaming, breach attack simulation, embedding the tools into the service, not marking our own homework as well at the same time, but making sure that we can demonstrate that the detections, the response processes, the automated attack disruption capability is working as expected, and helping our clients understand at the more kind of commercial and business level what that means in terms of where they are, in terms of what they might need to invest to make sure they can recover from any major business disruption as a result of anyone getting through.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've always sort of, I guess I've kept those two separate. The technical testing used to happen for me on a more frequent basis. So I'd be doing pen test, I don't know, every 3-6 months, and I'd only ever get the chance to go to the board and do a proper incident rehearsal, perhaps once a year. And so I might use the technical testing to feed into my scenario, but they wouldn't be the same thing for me. So interesting, guys, in the chat, if you do drive them together, if you do have them hand in hand in parallel, put in the comments there. It'd be interesting to see. Let's go with another question that's in there as well. There's a question here about another question from Derek. What are we seeing today in terms of AI and ML? And I promise that'll hopefully be the last time I mention AI today, but who knows, in terms of driving attacks and in helping detection as well. Are you seeing that coming through?
It's hard to pinpoint attacks that are as a direct result of AI and ML, but obviously there's various ways that can be used. Obviously, in terms of making much more convincing phishing attacks, being able to do things at greater scale, deep fakes, and so on and such forth. From the attack perspective, kind of what we used to call script kiddies, the less sophisticated attackers have got the kind of nuclear weapons that they're kind of disposal now, and so they can become much more sophisticated up at greater scale. On the defense side, I mean, back in 2019, like nearly 4 years ago, we were implementing machine learning based anomaly detection across networks and kind of across user accounts already then. And that's, it's more statistical inference, which obviously is a key discipline of machine learning, artificial intelligence. But obviously now we're seeing the great capability of the generative AI tools, which really assist with threat hunting. And again, Microsoft kind of really pushing their security co-pilot capability, and for getting junior analysts up to speed, kind of getting them move quickly, those kind of SOC-based tools in the background, from the user kind of hands-on perspective, proving really useful, looking very promising. But what's good for the goose, good for the gander. So as I say, we'll look to use it. Attackers will look to abuse it, and so it continued on ad infinitum.
I was talking to a large bank recently, and they were talking about how they've started to implement LLMs to help with their network security. So effectively, they've got a folder which has got 150 network diagrams in, and they're putting an LLM around the front of that so they can go and ask reasonable questions of the LLM and to understand what's connected to the internet, what's our most vulnerable position. And it just pulls all the data back from those very complex network diagrams and gives you the answer really easily, which sounds like a great thing until you worry about, well, what happens if someone compromises an account and then they get access to that LLM and ask, well, what's my way into the network? What's the simplest way in that's not being monitored? And they get to use the LLM against you. And that's something you have to be really careful of as well. So lots of positives and negatives in that AI ML space, I think. And I don't know, lots of the people I speak to think that we still haven't really understood the threat vectors yet. There's so much to come from this space that it'll keep on evolving for months and years to come.
That's a really cool scenario, though. I mean, as you can imagine, that having that attack path mapping works both ways. Understanding your attack path, so you can close things off. But if you're not quick enough and someone gets access to that data, then
well, compromised accounts are so frequent in attacks these days. So having the risk of having your LLM open to a compromised account means that the attackers can find that data. And so when they used to sort of take days to try and find your crown jewel data, now they can just go and ask the local LLM and it'll go, oh, it's just over there. So it becomes, there's a risk to it. Anyway, let me go back to I want to start because cyber resilience is such a big topic these days. It's one of the hot terms, isn't it? We've moved on from cyber security. Now we're all about cyber resilience. But in your report, it actually says that only 22% of CISOs feel that they are resilient. So Dom, can I ask you initially, what do you think from this report and the research you've done? What do you think you define as the term resilient? What does that mean to you in this report?
So in my report, I mean, I think in the report we also mentioned a bit about CISO burnout. Things are picking up, and that's obviously an industry-wide piece as well. But that resilient piece is feeling you've got the confidence that if something bad happens, you've got all the the processes, people, the knowledge in place to be able to bounce back from it in a reasonable time with minimum impacts. Obviously, to have that, you need to be regularly running those practice scenarios, checking your threat detections, doing the breach attack simulation, making sure that everybody's familiar with the practices of dealing with an attack. And continually driving that readiness and testing it is what kind of builds a level of confidence, and what we call raising the floor, not kind of raising the bar. Yeah. So because obviously when something bad happens, your default position is you forget everything you've learned, and it's kind of you're on instinct. So you need to make sure the instinct level is where it needs to be. And I don't think there's a lot of feeling in the industry at the moment that people are in that place. They're kind of very worried that when it all kicks off, that people are going to be scrambling around.
Yeah, that's true. But in the report, again, there's another stat in there which says that 77% of CISOs feel that they can detect and respond to an issue within 30 minutes, which I actually found quite surprising, because I see other stats which suggest that attackers often can be resident for quite a while, and it takes quite a while to detect and respond to an incident. So what's the reality here? They're not feeling confident they've got the capability, but they are feeling confident they can detect and respond in 30 minutes. Those two pieces of data seem to conflict a little bit. What's the reality here, do you think?
So my interpretation of that, I mean, if they're confident they can detect and respond within 30 minutes, but very worried about how they would deal with a major breach, then probably a bit of disparity about what the understanding is of that detect and respond. I mean, that's a bit of an industry-wide thing as well, because for me, if to detect and respond, I mean, you've got an incident generated by your detection technologies, you've got a certain amount of time to triage that as being a true positive, and then you've got that's your detection, and then your responses, you've got a certain amount of time to put in a countermeasure actions. Service providers coming from a more kind of IT solution provider background might classify that detect and respond as there's been an alert generated, we've acknowledged it in a system, and therefore we've got a timestamp against it, so it can detect and respond. And that's not the same. So, and another key thing to take into account is we mentioned the dwell time, attackers being in there. So we need to really drive for detecting at as early as possible in the attack life cycle, and it's very much a key to try and detect initial access and kind of respond and contain it there at initial access straight away. If you're detecting when the attacker's been in there for 100 days, you're probably going to pick up as they're at the end of their campaign and they kind of initiate command and control to exfiltrate all your data, and they've encrypted it already. So that's not really the outcome you want. What you really want is kind of to detect and contain straight away as soon as you see something kind of breaching the new perimeter. The new perimeter being identity and user accounts.
Yeah, true. Okay. Yeah, I think I'd be annoyed if the response that's defined within that was, we raised a ticket. Yeah, I don't see that as a response either, frankly. Okay, Tim, to you then. So the stats in this report, they seem to suggest that CISOs who've got a hybrid SOC feel more confident about their capabilities. So can you tell us, one, what is a hybrid SOC within your definition? And what's different about a hybrid SOC that really improves your confidence in its capability to respond?
Okay, so I mean, hybrid SOC can mean many things to many different people. I think one of the ways in which hybrid SOCs can be useful is they can extend, your team's capabilities, give you much more flexibility and scalability, help with those issues around skill development and training. Importantly, reduce cost and make things more time efficient. I think Dom was talking earlier around that speed and agility, and that's when hybrid SOCs if they get it right, can really start to pay dividend. And I think what I mean by getting that right is that we talk about utilizing tooling. So if you're utilizing tooling to try and do a lot of the heavy lifting, then you can start to utilize a hybrid SOC environment, working with clients' organization to try and do that investigation. So if you're using tooling, if you're using a SOC provider to do the containment first, so we believe in things like, you know, contain first, investigate immediately. So if you're doing that containment and you're utilizing the SOC provider to do that containment, then you can start to work collectively or collaboratively with your client to start that investigation and to investigate immediately. But one of the things that occurred to me when we were talking earlier around all the different colors of testing, purple teaming, blue teaming, red teaming, I think what we've got to try and do is we've got to try and change our perspective on what a SOC provider gives us. If we treat them as an extension of our team and we can work collaboratively with them, we're going to get a better value out of them. I think too many times we're seeing them as an outsourced provider. Okay, they are dealing with my security, therefore I'll leave it all to them. In the same way that we have done with things like pen testing and penetration testing, red teaming, they are the providers. They're going to come back and they're going to give me a snapshot in time of my environment. Okay, SOC providers shouldn't be treated like that. They should be seen as an extension of teams' capabilities to try and work in real time to stop threat actors coming in, rather than it's their responsibility to do that. And I think that's what we mean by a hybrid SOC provider, is somebody you can work as an extension and collaboratively work.
Okay, can you give me a quick example of what that might look like then, in terms of, you know, what does hybrid look in terms of staffing?
Sure, I think the you know, people are mostly familiar with sort of level 1, 2, and 3 teams within SOC providers, and I think you know, you're using level 1, which tends to be sort of where machine learning comes into play and automation to start to drive threat detections. So once you start to hand over to, you know, a level 3 analyst within the SOC, that's when you might want to bring in the customer and start to determine exactly what might have happened, how it might have happened, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's where we would certainly utilize the collaborative approach. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, that's fine. But I want to drill into this sort of in-house versus outsource a bit more. So let's continue that conversation, because the report generally does highlight the differences between, you know, satisfaction and capability between an in-house provided SOC and an outsourced one. And it shows, you know, I think it shows that the hybrid model that you suggest there fits pretty nicely in between the two. But Dom, a question for you then, because in the report it asks CISOs, what do you want? What do you want from your SOC? And they state 3 different things. They want speed, they want control, and they want resilience from their SOC. And actually, the stats also suggest that those are better provided by an in-house team. Yet you still suggest this hybrid or this outsourced model. So why is that, Tom? What's the reason that the outsourced model still is beneficial?
So I think keeping match fits is a challenge for an in-house team, because it's like the goalkeeper of a really great football team that's got an amazing attack, amazing midfield, amazing defence. Even when, you know, for 89 minutes of the game, he might not be doing anything, but then, you know, if the opposition breaks through, he needs to be still alert and on his game. So whilst a big football team could probably afford that, when you're looking at the economics for that, what we call the SOConomics, for a in-house SOC team to be available 24/7, have that kind of speed of response, that resilience, that agility, for something that might occur once every 12 months or once every 24 months, it's hard for them to justify. But on the flip side, if everything's outsourced, then when things do happen, the outsourced provider might not really have a, you know, intimate knowledge of the business, and they kind of are scared of making the right decisions. So the ideal model, what it brings together is, yeah, you can get the affordability of a 24/7, always on kind of, you know, people kind of match fit, drilled all the time, knowing how to deal with this stuff because they're doing it, you know, across the entire cyber world. But paired with people who know your internal people, how your business works, the right communication style, all those key collaborative things that matter.
Absolutely. No, as a CISO who had a hybrid SOC, I completely understand the benefits of needing to integrate them. So, Tim, what are some of the drawbacks of the in-house SOC model? And why do those drawbacks sort of really outweigh the benefits of it? What are some of the things you see?
The one you'll always hear talked about is cost. If you want to have a 24/7 model, you've got to have at least three teams of three, standing, rotating. But the other thing is around keeping those people interested. If it's not if it's their constant day job, and you're a mid-sized organization or even an enterprise organization, you're not going to be busy all of the time. So what else can those team members be doing with that time? Can they be kept interested enough? Are they going to have to sit with eyes on glass all the time? How do you keep them? How do you keep them interested? How do you keep the training up to date? So it's not just about cost. It's about the skill development, the augmentation of those staff members, and also, if you're trying to replicate what a SOC does, level 1 analyst work is pretty dull. So what are you going to do? You're only going to employ level 3 analysts, and then you're going to ask level 3 analysts to start doing level 1 work. So all of these things are really difficult. That's why a hybrid model works really well. If you've got the level 3 who, as Dom was saying, understands the business, but are working with a provider to add the level 1, level 2 assistance, and then also the level 3 coming together as those shared minds. One with the understanding of much more understanding of the business than the SOC provider. Obviously, you hope your SOC provider understands your business as well, but that's where you really start to get that value. But it's around cost savings, huge amount of cost savings and people savings, really, the minds and helping those people advance, be in the right place at the right time.
Again, from my experience of this as a CISO, it was staffing. It was always staffing.
Yeah.
Because now I have to go and find 5-10 good SOC analysts. It's really difficult to find them anyway. And then if you do get them, it's really difficult to keep them. And so it's a much easier model to have most of that outsourced to a third party who can make sure they can maintain this at scale and always provide me a service. And I didn't have all the headache of continually recruiting and trying to keep people on board. And then I think
it's much more fun for people to start working with a SOC provider. Looking at hypothesis around threat hunting, rather than being an alert monkey, effectively. If you're working with an analyst team who really understand what they're doing, and you can sit down on a daily or a weekly basis and start to look at hypothesis around threat hunting. That's the stuff that, when I speak to analysts anyway, that's the stuff that they enjoy, and that's the stuff that you can continually sort of grow your skill set as well.
Yeah. So Dom, how about some examples? You got any good examples of sort of hybrid models and how they've been effective and how they sort of bring in the benefits of both worlds?
Yeah, we tend to classify, we've got two kind of models which we use as a starting point. So one I kind of call the operational model and one I call the expert model. So in the operational model, the clients might have already invested in kind of quite highly skilled, highly capable people, but they don't run, don't use those people to do day-to-day operations because they're quite strategic, and they'll deal with kind of board level communications, making sure the cyber strategy is right within the business, and then we'll pair them up then with the 24/7 capability, and kind of help them kind of get the out of hours coverage, and also kind of feed in the insights of the industry. The other one is what I call the expert model. So that's where the client might be kind of using level 1, level 2 analysts on a new tech stack they've got, which is much easier to operate, but they need backup for when things really go wrong. They need people to help them develop the threat analytics, build out the automation, and kind of feed in the threat intelligence. So there's kind of two models, both kind of provide kind of full coverage for two different requirements for different client environments.
Okay. So looking through the report, one of the things I found is that the feedback on SOCs generally, whether in-sourced, outsourced, it's not good. There's quite a few sort of challenges and issues in there, and some of them look more commercial than functional. So a lot of CISOs don't like, as you mentioned earlier, the long contracts, additional costs for new functionality, or just a lack of clarity involving the pricing. How much am I going to pay for this? And obviously, as we mentioned, resilience is low. Was it 49-50% of people feel that the operations is underperforming, and very few feel that it's actually overperforming. So there's a big issue here in terms of not only the commercial problems of that contractual aspect, but is there a delivery problem here too? Are SOCs really not delivering on the value proposition that they promised? Or are they just terrible at describing their own value to the business? Or are they just got rubbish metrics? What is it that makes SOCs seem to be so in such a bad place right now? Who wants to take that one?
I think I'll jump in here and I'll hand over to Dom to sort of talk about a little bit more the technical side of things. I think there is in probably every area of business, not just security, there could be a delta between, and it's a three-form delta: what the client wants, what the client is offered, and then what the client is delivered. And I think there are gaps between those, and there's missing pieces of information. And maybe it's that pieces of information get dropped within all of those different stages. Client says, I want. Commercial person putting something together interprets that in a different way, passes that over to delivery. I think the secret to it is to get them all in a room. Get everybody in a room. Let's not have just commercial people talking to the client about what they need. Let's get the delivery people in there as well. If they're talking about the type of threat hunting that the client wants and how they want that done, and they want to understand what you can do, then pull the person in from the SOC who's talking about who's going to be delivering that threat hunting. Pull in the SOC manager and ask the SOC manager rather than asking the commercial person, and close those gaps down. And I think you have a much better chance of getting what you thought you were paying for. Dom, have you got some answers on the technical side?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes in terms of communication style as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of assumptions made in a lot of delivery teams in various SOCs that the clients understand, what the metrics that are being pushed to them or what they mean. I don't think there's enough context provided in terms of what that could mean for business risk. And again, back to the roadmaps and guidance piece. I think that's a key area where, if that's not happening, there's no view of what's going on, within this, the service provider's environment. So they could be doing a lot of work, but if it's not generated alerts or incidents, then it's hard for the providers to, for the clients to understand the value of what's being provided. So that kind of continual getting together to see, where are we today? Where do we want to be in the next 3 months? What's changed in the environment? What do we need to do to adapt and adjust to that? I think that kind of it's a way of demonstrating the value of the service provided. But I think a lot of what I've seen, a lot of SOC providers are not good at that over communicating piece and talking at the level that the clients need, and giving their stakeholder contacts the insights and information they need within their organization to talk to their business peers. It's no good kind of like throwing over a great big detailed technical report to your customer and thinking that's great for them to get everything they need, because they've got to kind of pull that apart and try and figure out how they're going to make the CFO understand that, for example. And I think as service providers, we can do a better job of helping with that.
Good, because I've got a question coming up in a few minutes about metrics and return on security investment, so you can answer me those there. Let's move on to sort of my next focus area then, about mid-size firms, because it was interesting that came up through the report again that the mid-size firms, somewhere between like 1,000 and 2,500 FTEs, seem to struggle in particular. They seem to get screwed over in terms of the contracts. They don't get the flexibility, they get less transparent pricing, they don't get the attention from the provider, so they get screwed that way. But then when the results come out, they're less confident about detecting threats, less confident in the provider's capability, and they even less resilient than the average, which is pretty poor to start with. So why are mid-sized firms, Tim, for you, why are mid-sized firms, why are they important? Why are they so critical in your view?
I think I'm gonna steal Dom's phrase, which is, what was it, Dom? They're getting hand-me-down SOC services from enterprise, and I think mid-sized organisations often are challenged with budget, They're challenged with staffing and the sophistication to protect themselves. So a lot of organisations decide to dictate to them what should and shouldn't happen rather than curate with them. But they're hugely important now more than ever, because what we're seeing is more and more supply chain attacks, and most mid-sized organisations in this country in particular are part of a supply chain. So they're a soft underbelly, and we've known it for years, and we've seen it for years, that if a threat actor wants to try and target a large enterprise, then go for the soft underbelly, go for the supply chain. And where are those supply chain organizations? They're typically within the mid-market. And if they're sold hand-me-down solutions because they're told that it's not attainable for them to have the bigger solution because of their budget, which I disagree with entirely, which is why I joined E2E. There is a way to do that. Then they start to have a challenge. There's a delta, and that delta, that soft underbelly, will be exploited.
Absolutely. I struggle to think these days of any organization that is not 100% dependent upon their supply chain. And that supply chain, as you say, is made up of mid-sized firms. There's no one organization I can think of where their value proposition is entirely within their own domain, entirely within their own capability to deliver. Even just if you think of Microsoft 365, if that went down, how many organizations would stop dead? It's just become, there's so many different organizations are now part of critical national infrastructure because they're critical to so many different organizations that are out there. So yeah, I see mid-size being really, as you say, a soft underbelly. So, but when I was in an organization that was around that size, I was always worried about the prioritization, and we sort of touched on this earlier. I always worried that when everything went to hell in a handcart, that if I went with a big enterprise supplier, that I wouldn't get the attention I needed, and that they would go and see all their investment banks first, and then 2 days later they'd phone me up going, right, what did you need again? Sorry, you phoned us. How can mid-sized firms ensure that they don't get screwed over in that way? How can they ensure that they get equal attention from their service provider?
So you might get that from enterprise. I'm not going to, those enterprise organisations who are offering SOC services. I'm not going to suggest that that's the rule. But certainly, if you start to ask in the same way that you would be buying anything else that is critical, start to peel the lid off the service and see how far you get. Start to see who comes to the meeting. Are there senior people coming to the meeting? Can you go and visit the SOC? Can you have a demonstration of can you talk to the threat hunters? Can you speak to level 3 analysts? All of those things. If you can't, then you're probably sort of playing second fiddle to an enterprise, a hand-me-down SOC solution, because you should really. It's difficult within enterprise to give those smaller organizations the same sort of leverage as you would the large organizations, but you can certainly start to see the level of service you're going to get in the buying cycle, and when you're starting to talk to them. And I think try and match your capability. Match the size of organization that you're looking for. There are many good boutiques out there who have got huge capability in threat detection and response, who aren't 200,000 cybersecurity organizations. There are 100, 200 specialist firms. Start to see what comes within that buying cycle. Start to feel whether or not you're just treated as just another organization.
It's a tough one, because in the buying cycle, though they do roll out the big wigs, don't they? They do bring out the exec. They do bring out all the analysts to talk to. The thing you need to get confident in is that going to continue once you've signed the contract? Because quite often that tails off pretty damn quickly.
Yeah. So if that's the case, ask for a shorter contract. We'll take on contracts. We'll do a monthly rolling contract, because we believe that it's the solution that should be sticky, not the contract. Okay, because that's what you're investing in. You're investing in that solution, and if it's good, you're going to stay for the long term.
Yeah.
Okay, rather than signing up to a 3 or 5 year, an organisation should be quite comfortable saying, you know what? Yeah, I'll sign up to a monthly rolling contract. as long as we're doing our job, you'll continue to do your job, which is to pay for the service.
Yeah, that does keep you focused, I'm sure, in terms
Yeah.
of as a provider, that you know
Absolutely.
that if you screw up and you don't provide a service regularly, then you don't have to wait to the end of the year before it goes away. You can lose it quicker, therefore it should keep you more focused, which is cool. Okay. Dom, okay, so we talked about the suppliers showing their service and their capabilities. What are sort of 5 things that your supplier should be doing, for the people on the call here, to show that they're capable and they're prioritizing their service and they're doing a good job? What should you see?
Oh, so 5 key things. So obviously they need to keep a clear view, or that attack simulation, or what I kind of like to refer to as detection surface validation, and that encompasses a few things within that. And that's obviously making sure that the coverage you have, because when you start out, the supplier should scope out what coverage you have, or you need, or you should aim to get to. And over time, you need to regularly test that coverage is what you still have. And that's not just against the kind of detections and analytics you might have rolled out, but also, what's happening in your industry in terms of, you might have certain areas of the MITRE ATT&CK work framework covered, but there might be new threats. That means you really should look at that other area as well. So where you might be covered against initial access lateral movement, maybe you want to think about reconnaissance and kind of start bringing in some kind of preemptive threat capability there. Also, kind of making sure there is that roadmap. How's the service going to evolve? How are you going to make sure that as these new things come in, that you're moving in time to be able to kind of meet them where they are, and not kind of playing catch up all the time because things have changed, and you've let things kind of fall into technical or service or product debt, and now you're playing catch up, and it's really hard. You keep things kind of nice and calm, and have that kind of evolution, service developments, and the easy metrics. You kind of, some of the reports we're starting to put out now. So I talk about your detection surface score, your attack disruption score, and what we've got a whole. We've kind of put a threat detection and disruption maturity model together, which shows where you are on that. One of your areas is how much coverage you've got versus how much you should have. How quickly can you detect and disrupt an attack? And you want to be aiming for the 15 minutes if you can. That's makes you a very tough target. And how often, what frequency are you doing detections, breach attack simulation, attack surface monitoring, and just your other posture scores as well, in terms of how quickly are you moving from a Microsoft secure score, for example, of maybe 55% up to 65%. What does that mean? How quickly will that drop down when new threats come in, and how quick, for what you're paying for the service versus the exposure that you had from that, is that delivering and kind of getting you back where you need to be? So we're not going to, it's not necessarily for the provider to say this is your return on security investment, but you need to provide all those parameters and figures that make it easy for your client to kind of put them into their model and say, we're paying this service provider this much, our risk position is X, and the kind of keeping us where we want to be, and moving our posture up kind of quarter by quarter.
So you ran through quite a few good sounding metrics there quite quickly. Give me one. What's the key one that if anyone on this call has got a SOC provider, what's the one that they should go back to their SOC provider later today and go, show me this metric. Let's have this as a metric now monthly going forward. What's a key one that you think they could use?
So the key one for us is what I said, that when I call the detection surface score, but that's kind of a bit special to us in terms of what we've built, and in terms of making sure that the coverage you think you have, you still have, and that involves us kind of going back and testing that your log sources are still there and they're still working, that they're still the appropriate ones for what you need, that the threat analytics you have in place have not gone stale, in that the threat landscape's moved on. There's no point trying to detect stuff that no one's trying to use anymore. i.e. updating that kind of threat analytics library and detection logic library with the latest and greatest threats intelligence. And I tell you a metric we're kind of looking to bring in as well, and that's mean time to analytic. So we talk about mean time to detect, mean time to respond, but when you get new threat intelligence in, and there's a kind of a new disclosure, a new vulnerability, there's a window of exposure you've got there between everybody knowing that versus you being protected by it, by the kind of having the right detection logic in place.
Yeah.
You want to know from your provider how quickly they can act on that threat intelligence. So what we're looking to bring is kind of that, it's starting to call it mean time to analytic, but how quickly do you move from knowing something's out there, it being disclosed, to protecting your clients with against it? Cool. And it's a two-stage thing. One's indicated as a compromise, which tends to be kind of signature type stuff, and the other one is proper threat detection logic and anomaly detection back into machine learning and AI again. But yeah, that because obviously those new things get tweaks, they get evolved by the threat actors, so you need to be spotting patterns and techniques and tools versus actual indicators of compromise.
One thing that always makes providers nervous is mean time to respond, and that also sort of sets aside the sort of really good providers of threat detection and response and those who might not be. Mean time to respond, the pushback you'll get is, well, often we're waiting for a response from the client. And if that's their response, that's the provider you don't want to be working with, because mean time to response should be around containment. How quickly can you take a threat detection and contain that? It's not about mean time to investigate and resolve. It's about mean time to respond. And if they're saying that we don't measure that because it's often around waiting for a response back from the customer, it means they're providing a sort of second-rate, low-level NDR type service as opposed to something that is needed in the marketplace now.
Okay, we are running short on time, so a couple of quick questions. So Derek asked another one, or mentioned a point about state-sponsored activity. Now, I know you guys have actually been working for some of the greatest organisations in the UK in terms of protecting critical national infrastructure. What have you seen generally regarding capability of outsourced SOCs against that state-sponsored threat? Do you think that they're well matched? Do you think that most service providers are at the right level to detect this sort of state-sponsored threat, or not? What do you think?
I think some are, and I think this is where you have to use your vigilance. I think some are better equipped, but some less so. If they're just depending upon tooling, if they don't have their own research capability, if they don't have expertise within that area, if they haven't got client reference sites that they can, they're hard to do inside certain areas. But if they can't put you in touch with someone that they're working with, they haven't got that pedigree, I would question it. Dom, would you agree?
Yeah, I would, and I think one thing to look out for is what is the threat intelligence capability of a provider you're kind of working with, because if they've not got something that actively where they can track different different threat actors, ransomware gangs, and are putting out threat intelligence briefs and reports that are of their own findings and kind of their own thought processes around what their own teams are creating versus just regurgitating what one of the bigger providers might have put out. That's kind of one way to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff as well.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to skip right to the end then and just say, Tim, are the 3 action points from this report that you guys have published, are the 3 action points that people can take away from this? Is there something you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Yeah, I think so. I think we might have a slide just to summarise that, which is what we were talking about right at the beginning. It's like understanding value. I think, Emma, can we pop that final slide up with the action points? There we go. Ensure your providers proving that value. Is there a way to ascertain, am I going to get value out of this service that I am going to invest in? Looking for providers that you can trust and you can relinquish that control to. You can give them that control and you feel comfortable after interviewing and talking to their SOC providers that you can relinquish control to them and not have to get as involved in the early stages as you do from other organizations. Push back on contracts, look for commercial flexibility. It's there, they just don't like doing it. I can assure you that it's there. And start to look at that, start to gain leverage from cyber defense commercial accessibility. you know, we are starting to see that there are more providers, good providers coming in who aren't just trying to provide a solution for the enterprise organization. So it can start to become affordable and accessible for mid-markets to really get an enterprise level solution at that mid-market. I hate to say it, mid-market pricing. It's an awful way of looking at it, but it is accessible and it is there. So I would say those are the sort of four main things that I would take away from this research.